Hello, everyone. It's with profound sadness that I share the news of Chuck Woolery's passing. My heartfelt condolences go out to his family, Mark Young, and the entire Blunt Force Truth team. This is certainly a difficult time. This is unexpected. I didn't expect to hear this news. And I had the privilege of meeting Chuck when I was just starting out with this podcast. You know, despite my lack of recognition, he and Mark graciously invited me onto their program, and that speaks volumes to me. You know, this is the kind of man Chuck was. From the moment I met him, he exuded warmth and sincerity. He was a true gentleman and one of the most humble and down-to-earth individuals that I've ever had the honor of knowing. And in a world where those qualities are so rare, he stood out as a beacon of decency and kindness. He was an American icon and a patriot. And his contributions, both as a professional and as a human being, they leave an indelible mark. He's going to be deeply missed by anyone who had the fortune of crossing paths with him. So rest in peace, Chuck. Your legacy is going to live on, and I know that we will meet again someday.
Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me. Make sure you are following and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com. You got a lot going on. Less than 2 months till the Biden administration's out. Trump administration comes in. And I have a great guest coming on today. I have Amanda Head, co-host of Just the News, No Noise, and the host of Furthermore with Amanda Head. Amanda, pleasure to have you on my show this time. How you doing today?
Hey, I know. I love this little switcheroo. Thanks for having me on.
Well, we got to switch it up every now and then. And
we do indeed.
There's a lot going on out there. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is you have President Biden. He's got less than 2 months to go in office. And all of a sudden, after a year of wrangling whether or not Ukraine should be allowed to use American long-range missiles to strike inside Russia, the guy couldn't make a decision. His administration is split on the decision. Some say it's too provocative. Others say that, well, Ukraine needs to do this. And then, shockingly, right after the election, President Biden authorizes it. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that this is let's talk about the money side of things, because I know Secretary of State Anthony Blinken had said, we're going to push through as much money as we can to Ukraine. There was, I think it was about $60 billion that was pre-authorized by Congress that was supposed to be spread out until I think the end of 2025. But he's trying to push that in, as much as he can up until January. So you have the money side of things, but now you have this side of things that is, the distance between the money and life and death is a little bit further. The distance between this action and life and death is very, very acute. And as we are literally now seeing in this conflict, what's unfortunate about this is that Joe Biden knows that for his legacy, it doesn't necessarily matter for him, because what has been solidified in his legacy, and I use that term very loosely, but his legacy thus far has been an unexplainable, really. I think that is, I think that's the best way to describe it, an unexplainable allegiance to Ukraine. And I know that there have been a lot of people out there who have talked about how Ukraine is basically serving as a washing machine for money for the United States. It's a money laundering operation. And this is a country that is consistently ranked in the top 20 of the most corrupt countries out of, 180 or whatever. So there has been this unexplainable allegiance and alliance between our country, at least the Biden administration, and Ukraine. What's scary about this to me, so I'll put this into context of a personal story. Growing up, my grandmother always read Reader's Digest. And as a result, now I always read Reader's Digest. I literally still get the physical Reader's Digest in the mail every month. So I basically have turned into my grandmother. But there was a short-lived column in Reader's Digest decades ago, and there was this one story that stuck out to me, and I can't remember what the name of the column was, and I think it ran for maybe 2 or 3 months in a row, and people were like, this is kind of devilish. But it was basically a revenge column of people telling funny stories of how they got revenge on people. And this one story stuck out to me. This woman, she was married, her husband cheated on her, and she was moving out of the house, and he was going to keep the house. So before she moved out, she stuffed raw shrimp into the curtain rods of the home where this man was going to be living by himself after the divorce. So you can imagine what that's going to smell like, and it's going to be impossible to find. It's literally like, who's going to think to look in the curtain rods? That's what this reminds me of. People are calling it a poison pill. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's shrimp in the curtain rods, a conflict that President Trump is going to have to deal with. Now, I have no doubt that regardless of the obstacles, regardless of the poison pills, regardless of the shrimp in the curtain rods, that President Trump has the ability to negotiate this, even though he's not a diplomat. He's not a, career politician. He's an outsider, which is what gives him the perspicacity to actually deal with this on a human and also on a business level. I mean, the author of The Art of the Deal is going to be able to find a way through this. The unfortunate aspect is what's the damage that can be done in the meantime, because you have the relationship between the United States and Russia, which is obviously was very rocky even before this cropped up 2 years ago or 3 years ago. But Russia has already announced, Vladimir Putin announced 2 days ago that they were going to limit the energy supplies that they ship to the United States, 25% of which we get from Russia. So what's that going to do for us in the wintertime when people are trying to heat their homes? They're already talking about how this is going to possibly cause brownouts and blackouts across the country. Now, here in California, we're used to brownouts and blackouts, but what can be done? What damage can be done between now and January? And when you consider Vladimir Putin and his views on nuclear reciprocity and the way that he's going to react to this, and he's already lowering the threshold as far as what he considers to be, justifiable nuclear reaction. I don't know if I can say this on your podcast. I'm hella concerned. I'm very, very much concerned of the damage that they can do until January. Now, if Putin doesn't strike because he knows who is going to put his hand on the Bible at high noon on January 20th, that's our saving grace. The saving grace is deterrence via who the future president is going to be. So while I am scared, I am trusting Vladimir Putin to make a wise decision, I suppose, and not push it. But for the Biden administration to do this, and like you kind of inferred at the top, there is no doubt in my mind that this was completely intentional because Donald Trump is taking over. If Kamala Harris had been the one taking the wheel, there's no way they would have done this. There's no way they would have. They honestly would have tried to have solved this issue before Kamala Harris took over, because they know that Kamala Harris would have never been capable of sitting across the table from Zelensky or Putin or, God forbid, both of them and trying to work out a deal.
Well, thank God we don't even have to imagine what that would have been
like.
Thank God. But, and yeah, honestly, that the decision was made prior to the election. They just didn't greenlight it because they knew it was an election loser. But you bring up something critically important is basically what's Putin's reaction going to be? Is Vladimir Putin going to stand down, essentially saying, all right, well, in 2 months, there's going to be a new administration that I have to work with. And, maybe we could find a way out of this. Or, and this is what kind of concerns me, is it's not so much Putin himself. It's the Russian inner circle around Putin that is much more hardline. So, Amanda, we're going to take a quick break, but I want to talk to you about that when we get back. So everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. So, Amanda, before the break, we were talking about the Biden decision to allow the Ukrainians to shoot American long-range missiles inside Russia and what the Russians' reaction may be, because the second American missiles start killing Russians, there's going to be an enormous amount of pressure to attack us. I mean, when you look at the United States, if we were at war with Mexico and Canada was shipping missiles to Mexico to use to kill Americans, the American people would be outraged and say, go get Canada. And so the question is, do you think that Putin will be able to hold his own inner circle at bay and just be like, relax and wait it out? Or do you think that they're going to push him? It's not like the United States, right? You can't go to war for 20 years and generals telling you that you're all making progress and you're succeeding, only to have a stronger Taliban than they were prior to 9/11. In Russia, when you lose wars, you die. I mean, it's plain and simple. Putin will not survive this. So what do you think about that?
I hope he is. I hope he's able to hold them off because I think you're exactly right. When you have a public mandate and you have pressure from your war council or whatever whatever term he uses for those people, I hope he can. But the alternative to that is Vladimir Putin being on the receiving end of cyanide on the tip of an umbrella, right? I mean, we know what happens if he loses that battle and if he doesn't acquiesce to them. I would also hope, though, that you know, I don't even want to talk about the humanity side of Vladimir Putin or any of the people surrounding them because I frankly don't think that there is much when you consider the inner workings of those types of people in Moscow. But I would hope that what ends up ruling their decision making is the same thing that I spoke about a moment ago. The consideration that I mean, we all remember that conversation that Donald Trump had with, I can't remember if it was actually Putin, maybe it was Medvedev, whoever it was, but Donald Trump recounted the story and he said, I told him that I would blow up Moscow. And he didn't really believe me, but there was like 5% of him that did. And that's all it takes. I mean, when you have Donald Trump, someone who the rest of the world considers, maybe a little crazy, do you really want to test that? Because he's coming into office whether you like it or not. Regardless of what happens from now until January 20th, regardless of whether Donald Trump has to come in and negotiate a peacemaking deal, or maybe he has to come in and clean up a mess. But regardless, if your actions affect the United States in a negative way, you've got an America First president who's coming in who, for the first time in a long time, Nick, I have faith in a president to actually put our country first and to do what's best for us. And I trust him with that. And I also trust the people who I know are going to be advising him on this. We had a conversation yesterday on the TV show with Victoria Coates and discussed this exact thing. And knowing that, Victoria, I don't know if she has accepted a position in his new administration, but knowing Victoria's wisdom and knowing that she was one of President Trump's, she definitely had his ear when it came to foreign policy and geopolitical strife. Knowing that President Trump is going to have people like that around him, I trust them as well. So we shall see. I don't pretend to be in the head or the heart of Vladimir Putin or any of his trusted advisors. I just would hope that common sense rules the day and that they make decisions based on that.
Well, it's a great point. I mean, when Trump first came into office, I was concerned about foreign policy. It's actually the one area I was concerned with when it came to Trump.
Because he's new at it, right?
Of course. I mean, listen, he's a business guy. It's a lot easier negotiating business deals, saying, I'm going to bring jobs to your country and help your economy than it is negotiating what's in our interest but goes against their interest.
Yeah.
So the unpredictable nature of Trump is what made him successful. Right. Nations couldn't predict him. And that's the thing. You didn't have 40 years of votes in a Senate and then vice president where you could predict exactly what a president's going to do.
Right.
They didn't know how far they could push with someone like Trump and when they needed to pull back.
Right. And they also didn't have the leverage. Donald Trump, because he didn't have the experience, which as far as I'm concerned these days is a negative. But because he didn't have that foreign policy experience, he hadn't been horse trading in the foreign policy arena for a long time. And therefore, he wasn't owing favors to people. He wasn't owing favors to a certain block of K Street. He wasn't owing favors to a certain, caucus within the House or the Senate. He could see clearly and judge only based on what he saw as what was best for American interests. And that, to me, that clarity of vision and decision making, I think is what we should aim for going forward. Because listen, I'm one of those people, call me jaded, call me skeptical, call me cynical, but I'm just one of those people. I think that every politician is crooked to a degree. I think that it is nearly impossible to go up to Capitol Hill to get anything done, anything for the interest of your people without doing a little bit of horse trading, without doing some compromise. It's just the nature of the job. And sometimes, and maybe I shouldn't say that they're all corrupt. No, I'm going to say they're all corrupt. But some of them to a much, much lesser degree. But President Trump, coming in fresh-faced, fresh-minded with that clarity, I think that that's something that we should strive to have at least a piece of in our candidates going forward.
Yeah, and not for nothing. When we elect a president of the United States, I'm not electing someone to be the moral beacon of the world. I'm electing
Nope.
someone to do what's in America's interest. So that's
And
the
Nick, I
point.
had that conversation with people over and over again leading up to this election because, especially, and this was so disappointing, people at my church who I had to have a really, really hard conversation with someone at my church because they were making this equivocation between Republicans and Democrats and basically saying, he could see how people could vote either way. And I said, I'm not going to use his name. Let's say his name's John. John, who is the party of hate? You have one party who stands for life, who stands for our Bill of Rights. Most importantly, right now, our First and our Second Amendment rights. You have one party that stands for personal autonomy and parents being able to make decisions for their own families and their own children, and for individuals being able to make decisions for themselves. And you have another side who is the party of Antifa, the party of BLM, the party of people who absolutely torched this country's cities in 2020, the party who tried to murder the candidate on the other side twice. Who's the party of hate? With Donald Trump, when it comes to his personality, you don't get the policies without the personality, because how many Republicans in the past have promised much of the same things that Donald Trump did, that Donald Trump actually accomplished in his first administration, not even to mention what he's going to accomplish in his second administration. How many Republicans in the past, said that they were going to champion those things? They didn't get it done because they didn't have the bombastic personality. They didn't have the aggression that Donald Trump had. They didn't have quite frankly, the double barrel middle finger mentality of screw you all, I'm going to do what's best for this country. And so I told people over and over again, if you have a rat infestation in your basement, you want to hire the best exterminator. You don't care if he shows his butt crack. You don't care if he smells a little. And if he curses on the job, you just want the rats out of your basement. And that's Donald Trump. Maybe his crack shows a little, maybe he curses a little too much, but he's going to get rid of the rats in the basement. And right now it's the rats in the swamp. And that's why he was hired. The American people, I think, and even people on the left, as we saw Democrats come over to the right side of things, they were sick with the status quo. They were sick with the establishment party, the uniparty in Washington, the blob, whatever you want to call it. They were sick of the government getting involved in every aspect of their life. And they saw Donald Trump as either the guy who could fix it, the guy who could possibly make things better, or I know plenty of people like this too who voted for him just to see him blow it all up. And you know what? If you voted for him for that reason, I'm fine with it.
Well, certainly DC needs that little spark, that's for sure. And on that, we're going to switch gears. So, everyone, we're going to take a quick break. Amanda, when we get back, I want to talk to you about this idea of the uniparty that you just brought up in Congress. So, everyone, hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. So, the uniparty. The uniparty still exists, and we know that there's going to be a Republican House, not much of a majority, a slim majority, but better than nothing. Unfortunately, you have feckless, weak-kneed Republicans, and that's part of the problem. And then you have the Senate as well. Yeah. Well, when we're looking at it, one of the things I'm really looking forward to is this Department of Government Efficiency led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Yeah. Because I talk about the waste, fraud, and abuse within our government time and time again. Yep. But we have to explain to the American people that the Department of Government Efficiency, it's not a really sanctioned position. Congress would have to authorize that. Right. In addition, whatever the department comes up with, those measures have to be approved by Congress. Yep. What type of willingness do you think there is, particularly by Republicans, to begin to start to downsize this overbearing bureaucracy that has routinely abused its power, that has routinely gone after political opponents? It's ideologically corrupted and bankrupted. And do you think that there is the will from Republicans to begin to dismantle the federal bureaucracy? Yeah, I mean, like you said, this has to be done through Congress. I don't know what the makeup of what is this, going to be the 119th Congress? I don't know what that's going to look like, but if I can use history to judge what I think might happen, looking at the 117th Congress when Donald Trump won, wait, was that 117? No, that was 116th. Yeah, 116. When he had the Republican House and Republican Senate. When Donald Trump won in 2016, remember when he came in and he said, for every new regulation or piece of red tape, we're going to strike down two. So it was,
Two steps forward, one step back, essentially. Republicans were quite recalcitrant when it came to that. And, Republicans love their jobs. They want to keep their jobs. They felt like that was something that would be a little bit too much of a disruption. However, Donald Trump was actually successful in making that happen in certain sectors, particularly energy, a little bit on the tax code. But there were some areas where President Trump was successful. If you consider that and then you add to it a little bit more amenability, because I do think that the makeup of the Republican caucus, particularly in the House right now, is much more America first compared to what it was in 2016. I guess I would say I'm hopeful. I'm a little Pollyannish on this. And I also think that when you consider how many Republicans are going to have to put their money where their mouths are, because a lot of Republicans out there, whether it was somebody in Illinois or Indiana or Ohio or New York or Florida or Oregon or whatever, Republicans were having to actually run on fiscal responsibility. And again, this goes back to what I was saying about Donald Trump, where Republicans for literally a century have been running on fiscal responsibility. But now you're in a new era where, because you have so many vocal people out there, Republicans on the House side, who are actually championing fiscal responsibility. Thomas Massie in Kentucky is known as Mr. No on Capitol Hill because he just won't approve any spending. And you got, the Mike Collins and the Tim Burchetts and Andy Biggs and, the people like that who I think actually do care about fiscal responsibility and turning money back over to the American people. I think the pressure is stronger this time around. So I don't know if they're going to be able to get rid of gobs of bureaucracy, but I do know that, there was a startling statistic that came out, I think it was the beginning of 2023, so after COVID was effectively over, and I think it was somewhere between like 56 and 62% of office buildings in Washington, D.C. were still vacant, were still empty, because people who had worked from home during COVID just decided to stay home. They just decided to keep people home.
I have to interrupt you for a second. So you have about 60% of federal buildings being vacant throughout the country, yet the federal government still somehow managed to spend $3.3 billion since 2021 on office furniture. And if we bring it to 2018, then we're talking $5 billion simply on office furniture.
Yeah.
How is this acceptable in any way? Did they work on milk crates before or something?
I know. I was running through a list of these like insane expenditures at the Pentagon, $200,000 on Starbucks espresso machines, all of these ridiculous expenditures that, and I think that, this was something that just really captured the American people this time around when it came to their vote. And it also kind of ties in with culture, with all of the celebrities who were endorsing Kamala Harris. It all just represented this really icky elitism. And for the American people, when people, here in Los Angeles at one point, we were paying $7 for a gallon of gas. It's now back down to, I don't know, $5 or something. But at the height of the gas prices, and even though they've moderated, people are still paying $6 for, a dozen eggs, or $7 for butter. When it comes to the American people and their intimate knowledge of the struggle, not only of themselves, but their neighbors, every time someone brought up government spending, every time you saw another bureaucrat out there, going to their second home in Delaware in the case of the Bidens, or in Napa, wine country in the case of Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi, every time you had a celebrity who came out and endorsed Kamala Harris, every time Kamala Harris wore a $60,000 pair of Cartier earrings, the American people collectively, a majority, by the way, because President Trump won the popular vote, people just were like, this is not the way it's supposed to be. And then you had all of these things leading up to the election. I was telling my husband, I was like, can you imagine 30 years from now when we are telling our children about the things that the buzzwords, the buzz topics that led up to Donald Trump's election in 2024, squirrels and raccoons, garbage, McDonald's, like all of these just strange cultural things, but they all centered around one theme, which was that the American people have been getting stomped on and looked down on by their government for a very long time. And Donald Trump, despite the fact that he was the wealthiest of everyone, he was the one who people related to. He's the guy in the Tom Ford suit that has a blue collar. He's the guy who, when he was building this, I heard this amazing story about him. People are like, oh, well, he stiffed his lawyers. Donald Trump might stiff a lawyer. He will never stiff a contractor. And he's not going to stiff a lawyer. He might delay paying them. But Donald Trump, despite his wealth, despite his stature, despite his mogul mentality, was the guy who the American people felt like was actually going to fight for them. And I think that that's what so many of these issues, whether you're talking about the border, whether you're talking about the economy, foreign policy, whatever the case may be, it ultimately came down to that this time around. And the American people gave a very resounding answer.
Yeah, they did. But one of the areas Trump is going to face, and we all know it, is the bureaucracy itself.
Yep.
I mean, the entrenched bureaucrats in office, those are the ones that are ideologically corrupt.
Yep.
You have most of the workforce in Washington, D.C. that votes 92, 93% for Democrats, contributes to Democrats. These are federal employees. And there is some talk about potentially moving some of these departments and agencies outside of D.C. And I want to talk to you about that when we get back from this quick break. So everyone, hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So, Amanda, what are your thoughts on maybe moving some of these departments into other states further west? Because we all know that you just stated it clearly, that the people, these elite bureaucrats, they look down on the American people. They look down on middle America. So if you move the departments there, many of them will just quit. You don't even have to seek them out and fire them. They'll
the trash
just quit.
taking itself out. I love it. I love this idea so much because, you look at the agriculture industry. If you have to put Mr. Bureaucracy red tape next to a chicken farm in Ohio or Iowa, potato farm in Idaho, where do potatoes come from? Idaho. You put that bureaucrat next to that person, if they have to start passing them in the grocery store, if their properties bump up next to each other, there might be a little bit of a hesitancy to punish them with red tape. But before that even happens, that's if you even get them to move. If you can get them to move. I'm with you, Nick. I don't think these people want to leave Washington. I think they love their Washington, they love their Georgetown cocktail parties. They love being the first people on the list for reservations at the bougiest restaurant in DC. They love that. And they're not going to give that up. If you take 10 people out of the FDA and say, we're going to move you to flyover country, I bet you 9 out of 10 are going to say, no way, Jose, I'll find something in the private sector.
Yeah, they'd stay on the coasts. Yep. That's where they want to be. And again, they just look down on the American people, and that's what led to a Trump victory and Republicans recapturing Congress. So what do you think should be the most important priority? I mean, obviously, waste, fraud, and abuse, that's important. I think that should be a top priority. But as far as the administration goes, day one, what do you think is going to be the top priority?
I think that of the executive orders that he is going to have drafted and ready to sign, I think the plurality are going to be pertaining to energy and immigration. Those are things that President Trump can do via executive fiat. It's things that have immediacy when it comes to the safety and the security of our country. But I think when it comes down to this administration's overall priority, it's got to be border security. Because that is going to affect the demographics. It affects everything in our country, right? It affects our demographics. It affects our economy. It affects our schools. It affects our healthcare system. It affects our taxes. It affects everything. But I think that the mentality going in, and we are already seeing that with his nominees, the mentality has got to be flood the zone. Every time they are, the left is getting up in arms about one nominee, shove another one down their throat, and another, and another, and another. So their heads are spinning so quickly that they don't have time to combat every individual nominee. And with respect to some of these more scandalous, if you want to use that term, for some of these nominees like Matt Gaetz, you know what? Screw him. Absolutely screw him. There are a number of other nominees who I think if you took Matt Gaetz out of the equation, they would be opposed to, but now they are forced to shift their focus on Matt Gaetz because they think that he's going to serve in a punitive mentality when he goes into the DOJ, which, I don't necessarily support that. But what's the phrase that, sometimes revenge looks like justice or justice looks like revenge. I think that there is a major mop-up job that has to be done at the Department of Justice, at the FBI, within the entire intel community, at the FDA, at the NI. I mean, there isn't a single three-letter agency in Washington that doesn't need a complete mop job. So I just hope that it is a flood the zone mentality and a complete disruption to the status quo that has congealed in that city for so long.
Well, I can assure you of one thing. We are going to have plenty to speak about over the course of the next several months. There's going to be no shortage of topics.
Absolutely. I love it. You know, I'm so glad that what you just said is within the context of a Donald Trump victory and not within the context of a Donald Trump loss and a Kamala Harris administration. Thank God that that's the conversation and it's not. And you know, as you and I were talking before we came to air, I thought that on election night, I'm gonna tell you a somewhat embarrassing story. I wore waterproof mascara on election night because I felt like, just because of all of the emotions involved, that I would cry one way or the other, just because of the emotion and the importance of the night. I didn't end up crying at all. And it was the same thing with my wedding day. I wore waterproof mascara on my wedding day expecting to cry, but I think it's because you're so tightly wound and there's so much going on, I didn't cry. And I remember the next morning I woke up, I'm like, man, I guess I'm not going to cry about this. You know, this time around, thank goodness it was tears of joy. But I was in Atlanta, Georgia on election night covering the Georgia GOP party. The next day I flew to Washington to spend the rest of the week with John in studio. And I was on the plane and I had a playlist going, and randomly on my playlist, YMCA started playing. And Nick, I lost it. It all came out. And thank goodness I was on an empty row by myself. But that was when, I mean, I'm talking like that type of crying. And yes, of course, it was tears of joy, but I think it was also just a release of 4 years of fighting every single day, waking up and fighting every day, being exhausted all the time of everything that we are seeing happen to our country. And so I thought that on election night that there would be this huge sense of relief, and there is, but it's been little by little, because it's been honestly kind of hard. That muscle memory of fighting every day is hard to break, and we're still going to have to fight. But thank God we are fighting to protect this president and protect what he's trying to do, instead of the other way that things could have gone, which would have been fighting a Kamala Harris administration, because I feel like we would have been on the losing end of that.
Yeah, and let's be honest, the way she burned through over $1 billion and landed $20 million in debt would foreshadow how she would have ran the country. So
like, really? This lady should be in charge of our economy? Are you kidding me?
What a disaster.
And then Trump was like, oh, I'll help you pay off your debt. And I thought about that chapter. I think it's Proverbs 25. That talks about, if your enemy is hungry, give them something to eat. If your enemy is thirsty, give them something to drink. And in doing so, you will heap coals of fire on their head. I'm like, that's exactly what he's doing, because, you know, there was no way they were going to accept help from Donald Trump to pay down their debts.
Well, there's no greater troll out there. And I mean that in a good way, not a disparaging way, than Donald Trump. I mean, the McDonald's thing, the garbage truck, the offering to pay off her campaign debt.
Incredible.
Brilliant.
Incredible.
Amanda, I really appreciate you coming on. Everyone needs to check out Just the News, No Noise. And furthermore, with Amanda ahead, I'll have links up at the P.A.S. Report podcast, PASreport.com. So thanks for coming on, Amanda, and happy Thanksgiving to you and your family.
Same to you, Nick. Thanks for doing this. Let's do it again soon.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at PAS Report.